Welcome to episode 6 of Conversations with the Code 9 Foundation. In this episode, we are joined by outgoing Victoria Police Chief Commissioner Graham Ashton. Graham, thank you so much for joining us in this episode.
Oh, well, it's nice to be with you, Erin. Some very important topics that you cover in Code 9, obviously, so happy to be with you to talk about them.
Fantastic. Now, listen, Graham, before I do each podcast, I do a little bit of background research on the person that will be joining us for the chat. And listeners, I have to admit that during the reconnaissance that I did for this particular podcast, I stumbled across the fact that Graham is indeed a member of a secret, highly organised group whose members wear black uniforms and headgear and have their own secret signals, logos, rituals and equipment that they use in a bit of a quest for nationwide dominance. And I guess I can reveal, if that's all right, Graham, that our guest is actually a member of a very feared club called the Brisket Boys. Now, is that actually correct, Graham?
It's you've put it in a very toxic way, but very sinister. But yes, it's a barbecue team actually, and they're called the Brisket Boys Barbecue Team. And we do. We're right into barbecue. We go to competitions and compete against other teams. It's a very fast-growing area, but it's been long been a passion of mine, and I've sort of gotten more seriously into it in the last couple of years as being part of this team. And it's been a really great outlet for me. To focus on other than the police work, so it's been a real chance to to have a passion outside of the policing.
And I think that's so important, isn't it? And I think that's the part of what leading into this whole conversation that we're going to talk about today in terms of mental health and the importance of self-care. Is that it's so important to have something outside of work, isn't it?
Oh yeah, I mean everyone's different. Everyone has different ways of dealing with the pressures of work and daily life. So some people love exercise, some people just like being on their own, reading a book, other people like to take up hobbies or fishing or these sorts of things. Or everyone's different, so just what works for you. And certainly for me, I like spending time in the veggie garden at home, and this is the barbecuing is obviously another major outlet that I really like to do, and it works for me. It focuses your thinking on something other than what here in this job is a very full-on sort of role. Thinking about something other than work is important, and that's the way that I do that. But it's everyone's different, and what works for some doesn't work for others.
Absolutely. Now, Graham, a very serious question, but this is one that's really just maybe a bit of a selfish one for me. My dad listens to all of my podcasts. Hi, Dad. Dad has a bit of a problem, and he tends to, particularly around Christmas times, he's the one that always takes charge of the Barbie, and he manages to always be able to cremate everything on the outside while everything's raw on the inside. So if I can take this opportunity while I have you here, if you have a bit of a tip for my dad, Graham, how can we elevate him from being a really poor barbecuer to even just an adequate one at Christmas time?
Yeah, my advice to you, Dad, is what's your dad's name? That'd be a bit more informal.
Ted.
Sorry?
Ted.
Ted. My advice would be to get rid of the gas, mate. Get yourself a little Weber and use some coals and generate a lower heat and cook them slowly, and then turn up the heat right at the end to get your sear on the outside of the snags. But you'll do a much better job on a lower heat than blasting it at the end rather than blasting it from the word go, and that'll produce a nice, tasty meal at the end of it rather than a plate of charcoal.
There we go, Teddy. You've been told, and by no other than the Chief Commissioner of Victoria Police. So there you go. You don't have to have it blaring from the start, Dad. We've told you every year, but anyway. That's aside. So thank you very much, Graham Ashton. Now, look, there's actually a serious message in all of this. Back in November of 2017, you actually announced that you were taking a 6-week break, having become mentally and physically exhausted. Now, you could have just taken some annual leave. You could have quietly just slipped away and taken leave like all of us do. Why was it really important for you to be so open about the fact that you were actually taking some time out to, as you said, recalibrate?
Well, I wanted to be honest with my workforce because I had been for the previous 2.5 years going around telling everyone that mental health is a priority, and they've got to, if we're going to deal with the issue, particularly around the stigma associated with speaking up and getting help, we had to acknowledge, we had to encourage people to acknowledge issues and seek help. So having talked around and the organisation and encouraged everyone and exhorted everyone to do that, I thought it would have been hypocritical for me not to do it, because suddenly I was dealing with real sort of burnout, and I was really just at the end of both ends of the candle, and needed to take some time to recalibrate my life really about how I was managing myself to get healthy. And so I thought, well, there's no point being hypocritical. I need to speak up and say it, and maybe that might do some good for the workforce as well. If they see, well, if the person in the Chief Commissioner role is willing to speak up about an issue he's dealing with, maybe I can too. And so that was really what sat behind it, and I think it's helped. I think I've had a lot of messages and conversations, emails and the like, people that said that it helped to make a difference to them, and that certainly has lifted my spirits on many occasions when I've been told that.
And that's certainly the feedback that I've received as well whenever I've spoken to anybody within Victoria Police and policing and even emergency services more generally throughout Australia, is that was certainly the reflection that I get when they talk about you, is that you lead from the front and you lead by example. And it's certainly very similar to, I think, the experiences with Tony Walker from Ambulance Victoria, is that you lead by example. And if you're willing to get out there in front of people and talk about it honestly and say, hey, I've dealt with it, this is my experience, then people who work for you as well are going to be more likely to open up as well, because, hey, if the boss is likely to experience it and happy to talk about it as well, then it makes people more comfortable to talk about it themselves as well.
And I was someone that felt very resilient too. I'd never had any issues with my resilience and ability to deal with situations at all in my professional life leading up to that point, really. And so, it was a real sort of shock to my system that suddenly I wasn't coping, I wasn't dealing with things. So in terms of being able to speak from experience, and as you mentioned, Tony's really good at talking about these issues as well in the ambulance sector. But certainly having gone through that, I do feel that I can have a more meaningful conversation with people that are going through it as well now, or have gone through it in the past.
So, Graham, for listeners who might not be as familiar with your journey, how long have you been wearing the police uniform in various different variations?
Well, I've been in law enforcement, I guess, for 40 years this year. So since I was 18, and it's which will be one of the weird things about retiring is I've had a job in law enforcement of some sort for consistently since I was 18. So it will be a shock to the system, no doubt about that.
Yeah, so that's a long time, it's a lifetime. 40 years, that's a lifetime. So when you think about going home on that last day and taking that uniform off for the last time, do you think you're mentally prepared for that?
Hard to say. I hope so. It's a busy job, and then certainly I'll, when the phone's not suddenly ringing or anymore, and the text messages aren't coming, and emails, etc., and the alerts aren't coming through all the time. It'll be a bit of a shock. I'll think that the phone's broken or something, I'm sure, and then realise it's not. So there's that side of it. That certainly is going from 100k an hour to zeros like overnight is a bit of a change. But I think at the same time I am ready for the next stage in life, and I know I'll miss the people as you do, because there's a lot of really good people around here, and I will miss them. I think there's no doubt about that. But I think in terms of I'm trying to think very positively about sort of what's next in life, because you only get one go at life. So I am sort of looking forward to embracing new challenges, whatever that might be.
How well do you think the emergency services do? And I mean, you can obviously reflect quite closely on Victoria Police, but I'm thinking just in general here, how well do you think the emergency services do in looking after their personnel once they retire?
Well, my candid view is that I think we used to be terrible at it, and I've heard many examples where that's been the case, and that's something that we've been passionate about turning around. And I know we have made a lot of ground in that area, but there's still a long way to go. Certainly in the policing context, which is obviously the area I'm more familiar with, we really wanted to try to bring the term veteran to the conversation with our past serving members, so that they start to embrace a term that is more valued than ex or former or past. And those terms, those sort of phrases that have a negative context to them, where we really want to value the service that people have provided after they've served. And as part of that, we want to acknowledge that we've got a duty of care to them.
Yes.
And so we have done a lot in investing in providing services to veteran police officers in the policing context, because we see that as so important. And we've broken a lot of people over the years, a lot of people dealing with really big issues as a result of their policing service. And we've still got a duty to try and support them. And now we do have resources dedicated to supporting them. And we've started an organisation focused on veteran support as well and veteran welfare. So we are doing more now than we've ever done to try and turn that around, but still much more to do though.
What about their family members, Graham? So I understand that while police officers are still actively part of the force, that their family members get access to support. Do they get access to that sort of support ongoing once they've retired?
Yes, well, they do now. If they can, like we've got resources internally dedicated to that, and certainly we've got an external facing services, for example, through our external facing website that veterans can go to, and it's also to address issues in veterans' families and for veterans' families to understand the sort of issues that their loved one might be going through. So we certainly acknowledge families are so critical in that regard, and you hear it even within the serving members from the time they're at recruit course. You talk to family members, and they straight away want to know how they can help their loved one, and what sort of resources would be available to educate them as to what their loved one's going through. Yeah. It's very common for members not to talk about issues and bottle them up when they go home. So often they don't know, they just know something's different, and the family members, and they don't know what it is. So those skills are really important around how you approach these topics and how you provide that support and how you can feel more comfortable doing that.
One of the things that really stood out for me throughout the bushfire crisis was when Shane Fitzsimmons, when he was still with the RFS, was being interviewed on TV and got quite emotional in one of the interviews and highlighted that he couldn't have got through that crisis without the support of his family. And it really struck for me. And again, it was one of those times when I love it when leaders are like really transparent and honest and just show how being in leadership positions can really be difficult. And I'm just wondering how, particularly recently, Victoria Police have been through an incredibly difficult time when you lost tragically 4 of those police officers that you had under your care, and I'm sure you went home that evening and were absolutely distraught. And I'm wondering how you lean on your family and how your job impacts your family over the years.
Yeah, I've sort of tried to, as a lot of police do, to sort of insulate them a bit from everything. So, but to do that, I've had to sort of try and find other outlets through which I can talk about things sometimes, and I've managed to do that. So I've sort of taken the path of trying to insulate them as much as possible. They sometimes know, they'll know from the news and things if I've had a tough day sometimes. So they know, and they are supportive when that happens. And but I've sort of never really talk about work at home. Like if I go home, I never really bring work issues home, and in terms of conversationally. And so I'm aware that it's good for them, but it's not good for me sometimes.
Yeah.
So I need to make sure that I do have a way of getting that out. And so, there's a couple of people that I will have a coffee with or talk to, and as a way of, if I need to talk about that stuff, I can, so I can still get that sort of not have to bottle stuff up, but still have a way of trying to make sure my family have as normal life as they can without me piling things onto them.
Is that something you've had to learn to do over the years? I know even in my line of work, in doing a lot of work and research with 9/11 responders over a 15-year period, and towards the start I would come home and just inadvertently talk about things with my husband, and you could see by the look on his face sometimes that he didn't need to hear some of the things that I would relay, and I'd realise probably too late that I'd vicariously traumatised him. And I've now learnt to talk about things that I needed to get off my chest with my psychiatrist instead of talking about it with my husband, and so I learnt that the hard way. So I'm wondering, is that something you maybe learnt over time?
Yeah, definitely. Look, sometimes, you might end up being a bit grumpy or something at home. One of the girls, my daughters or something, that might be doing something that might ordinarily go through the keeper, but then I might be grumpy and snap about it, just sort of verbally be more grumpy than I might otherwise be. And sometimes I notice that if I've had a hard day or something and I need to, so sometimes I say to them, look, if I'm a bit grumpy, tell me, because I need to snap out of that and be self-aware of what I'm doing, and then, as you say, use another outlet to express that frustration or whatever. I think that's a process that is always a work in progress, and I don't think anyone was perfect at that. It's a matter of growing as you become more self-aware in your life, and understanding what works for you, what doesn't work in your life, and the more self-aware you can be, the better in that regard, to try and avoid that. But I have noticed, there's occasions when that happens, and a bit like that sort of example that you've conveyed. That you don't want to be traumatising other people by what you've gone through in any particular time. So it's all about trying to care for those around you while you're trying to care for yourself.
Yeah. Well, as you said, 40 years, that's a long time to be in a career. When you reflect back on that and everything that you've been through, with a particular focus on how much you've done to remove stigma attached to particularly when we talk about mental health, and really to normalise those conversations that we have around mental health and wellbeing. Is there anything that really stands out for you in terms of when you think back on that, you think, oh, I might have done that differently if I had another chance at it, or maybe I would have done it sooner or approached it differently?
Well, there's lots of examples where in any police career of any length where you'll look back and after something's happened and question whether, if things had been done differently, something could have been avoided in terms of community harm. Every police officer, I think, asks themselves that question post something happening, and in that context it can be a career sort of filled with regrets in some ways. But I think that within the mental health context, I sometimes wish that I had started to lobby for change earlier than I did. I felt that I really wanted to make changes when I'd become Chief Commissioner of Victoria Police and get these issues out from under the carpet and in the corridors into open conversation and part of an open dialogue about mental health and the force to try and deal with the stigma issues and try and put some processes and commitment to resourcing in place. But looking back now, as I said, why didn't I do that when I was a Deputy Commissioner or Assistant Commissioner? I still had a lot of influence. Why did I wait until I was the Chief Commissioner? I could have lobbied much earlier than I did, really, when I look back. I thought, when I'm Chief Commissioner, I'll be able to do this and that and this and that. But when thinking about it now, looking back, I thought, I could have put pressure on earlier for other people to pick up the mantle and run with it as well. So, yeah, and I think sometimes in the mental health context, we all know anyone who's been in the emergency services for any length of time will know people that have whose mental health has deteriorated to the point where they've taken their lives, and I've had examples of that where I've had friends that have done that, and you always have that regret about it. Gee, why didn't I pick up the signs that something was that wrong, and they were struggling to that extent? Why wasn't I perceptive enough to notice that, particularly when you'd had very recent contact with them? And and they were, in my case, these people would sort of be asking about me and how I was going, and I didn't pick up that they were struggling. So there's those sorts of, in the mental health context, there's sort of those sorts of regrets, I think, and thinking that you could have done better.
Yeah, but I think it's interesting because we, obviously here in Australia, we look inwardly and we think, yes, there's unacceptable suicide rates. We still have those statistics that we probably think are just the tip of the iceberg in terms of the reported statistics of one suicide every 6 weeks of a paramedic, police officer and a firefighter. We've had the 2018 Senate inquiry into the mental health of the people behind 000. We've had the big Beyond Blue national survey of some 21,000 emergency service personnel. I think we're getting pretty good at identifying what some of the problems are. But when you talk to people out there in the field, they're like, but we still haven't really seen significant change yet. And I'm wondering what your reflections are on what we actually need to do at the ground roots to really see that change come into play.
Look, I think that we probably need the next stage. I know we're all moving at different rates in that regard, but we've got to make sure we've got the ability to respond in a professional and healing way when something occurs by way of a mental health injury, or there's a traumatic event that could precipitate injury. That's the sort of thing we need to make sure we're well resourced in. And of course, we do have to do a lot, as we've talked about stigma, and when we're all trying to be the ones that cope in first response, and then you can't cope, that's counterintuitive, and you don't want to seek help or acknowledge that you're struggling in that context because it's counter to the culture. So there's the stigma piece as well. But I think probably to move into that next stage around prevention, it really has to be, I think, us committing towards compulsory conversations. One thing I'd like to get to in VicPol over time, it's the end of my time here, but I'd like to continue to build the resourcing so that we have every 6 months mandatory check-in in that site conversation and welfare site conversation to say, even when you're travelling well, check in, how you're travelling, what's your toolbox look like in terms of your resilience, how self-aware are you of that piece, and for a constructive conversation to occur in a very preventative context. And that's the next piece. And I think on the ground, once you start to require that, it'll start to become more second nature. And I think that we can get to that sort of stage. And I think we'll be able to sort of think very positively about the difference we're making. I know in our data at VicPol, we're seeing a difference. We're seeing a benefit in people speaking up. We had, at one point, it was, when we initially started to turn it around, and we turned around big in terms of people reaching out. We had a 70-80% increase in people contacting our welfare services. So, we're starting to get that. But I think in terms of the real cultural change and the feel of that on the ground, I think once we start to institute a really solid prevention piece, I think that's when they'll start to feel it.
Well, I'm really excited about some of the things that you said there. A couple of the words that really stood out for me were checking in and prevention, and that's certainly some of the things that I tend to talk about, is that for so long a lot of our wellbeing models have really relied on people who are in crisis reaching out. And we know that when people are in a deep, dark place, they won't reach out for help. They often can't. And I know for myself, when I've been struggling, sometimes it's even hard to pick up the phone to a loved one, let alone to a stranger at the end of an EAP, for example. So I think I've been talking for quite a while now about needing wellbeing models that actively reach into people. And I really love the fact that you're thinking along the lines of having some kind of model that actively reaches into people even when they're thinking they're well, and establishing some kind of rapport with their wellbeing team so that when they are in crisis, they're much more comfortable to reach out. And so I think that's a fantastic model to follow up. So look, we're coming towards the end of our podcast. I could talk to you for ages, but I'm very cognizant of time. Look, you are certainly leaving some pretty big shoes to fill. So I'm really interested to hear what advice you would give to the new Victoria Police Chief Commissioner who will be coming in, Shane Patton, when it comes to protecting his mental health and wellbeing. So if you could give him some advice about looking after himself in the top role, in terms of lessons learned from you being in that role, what would you share with him?
Well, I've been very open about what I do within my team here, and we've had a really. One thing I have been fortunate in the last 5 years is to have a really solid, committed, loyal team around me here as part of our executive command, and not something that Big Pol has always enjoyed, and I'm very happy that I've had the benefit of that, and Shane's been a member of that team all the way through. So I've been very open about all this with him. He knows every step of the way as far as what I do. And he's quite a self-aware guy too in terms of understanding what works for him. And I think that he's got his, things work differently for him than me in terms of what he does. He's sort of, the physical exercise is really important to Shane, and for example, and there was other things as well that he does already that built his resilience. So I think he's pretty well placed. I think he's a clever guy. He's someone that can be a firm decision maker, but compassionate in the same measure. And I think that will stand him in good stead in a role like this, where you very often have to manage with your head but lead with your heart, and he's the sort of person that I think displays the ability to do that. So I think he has the right ingredients. I mean, you can never know till you do these jobs what they're like, and he'll have that learning curve, of course, but I think he's well placed to deal with it, and I think he'll do a great job as the Chief Commissioner.
Fantastic. Well, one final question. So our listeners, our members within Code 9, we have thousands and thousands coming from the different emergency services, so paramedics, firefighters, police officers. We have people from ESTA, 000 operators, dispatchers, call takers, and then actually a growing membership coming from the families, so the partners and carers and even children of the first responders. So we have a really broad listener base with these podcasts. So one final reflection to the broad listenership, coming from your years and years of experience and what you've learned with your own mental health as well. So any final reflections in terms of looking after mental health, and particularly knowing that a large proportion of our listeners are dealing with PTSD, they're living with PTSD and mental health conditions, their partners who are trying to care for their ill health retired first responders. Any words of wisdom, any parting advice for them in terms of what you've learned in terms of mental health and moving forward in terms of protecting mental health?
Look, probably, within the context that you've just described, it would probably be to say, look, the community acknowledges how difficult this work is that first responders of all varieties do. They understand the broader families, your mums and dads, you out there in the community. They do understand and they appreciate the work that you do. And for families, they appreciate the fact that the families of those first responders support and make that possible. They understand it's hard work, and so you need to understand as a first responder that it's hard work, and not be hard on yourself, and the fact that it's okay to struggle, it's normal, and that there is a better place to get to, no matter how injured you might feel. There is a better place to get to, but you'll only get there with support. And society is littered with a lot of examples of people who haven't been able to successfully make that journey to wellness because they tried to do it on their own. There's a lot of people who do want to help. There's a lot of people committed to help. If you seek it, if you talk about it, if you share it, then it's the best way to get to a better place. And I've seen plenty of people get to that better place. And it's there, and it's there if you're willing to get the right support and care around you to do it. And I think that to acknowledge that that's okay. It's tough work. It's okay to struggle when you do it. There's few parts of society that have to do as difficult work as you all do. So it's okay to struggle in that context because anyone would. So you're not alone. Do your best to get the support around you because there's a lot of people out there who will acknowledge and are ready and willing to support you.
Well, some very wise words indeed. And you said that the community appreciates the work that our first responders do. On behalf of the Code 9 Foundation, we certainly appreciate the hard work that you have done. It's been a significant contribution that you have made to the community over some 40 years. We certainly hope that it's a smooth transition into retirement for you and that there are many barbecues in your future. We wish every success to you and your family in your retirement, Graham. Thank you so much for your time today.
It's a pleasure, Erin, and take care.